thank you all for joining. Honestly, the Friday afternoon of droidcon New York, as some of you attendees might know, it's a little bit of a sparse crowd sometimes, but we got some committed fans here. This is going to be a pretty lighthearted, fun presentation, so I hope you guys enjoy it. We're talking about something a little bit less technical than the other stuff. I've seen a lot of KMP, a lot of really cool camera stuff, and a lot of code demos. This one is more just generally about some observations I've had about mobile and the software industry as a whole, and hopefully I can highlight something that I think is kind of a pressing problem in software that hopefully you guys can address within your own communities after this. So without further ado, let's talk about the critical need for more Android mentors and all that jazz. Does anybody in here like jazz? Any jazz fans? Nice. Okay. Well, you don't have to like jazz, but we are going to talk about it quite a bit. At any rate, this is me. Same picture, I guess, as the one before. I work currently at Klaviyo as a senior Android engineer. I'm living in Boston. Previously, I was at Peloton, Whoop, and Python. These were all sort of like front-end Android development roles. Also based out of Boston, Peloton, New York, but I was fully remote for that. A really important thing for me as well is the GDG organization. Maybe some folks are familiar with it. It's basically a partially sponsored Google club almost to discuss software. And I am the Boston Android organizer, so help put on some festivals we'll talk about a little bit later. I started doing Android development in 2019, which, there's a lot of people who've been doing Android for a lot longer than me, and I'm definitely the first to admit that here. I'm pretty new to the space, all things considered. I would consider myself a post-Golden Age mobile developer, if we're talking about timeline framing of all of this. It's kind of the development side of things, but obviously, everyone's got their side hustle outside of work. I like to do jazz drumming in my free time. These are some local dive bars in the Boston area, some respectable institutions here. I really do spend a lot of time thinking about jazz and jazz drumming, and the reason why this is relevant to this presentation is because I actually believe that you can learn a lot from the jazz community and apply that to software, and I think we can see how jazz has maintained popularity in its subgroup and how we can potentially take those lessons and use them with mobile development. This looks like a jarring picture to have next to each other, but I promise you, maybe I can convince you that they do have a little bit more in common than would meet the eye at first. All right. So, like I said, I truly believe that the best way to explain it is with jazz. Objectively, I looked at a lot of other ways here, but I think that this is just the one that makes the most sense. So, where did this ridiculous idea come from? This is a lightning talk, so we are going to move quickly through this. As you could probably imagine, somebody like me spends a good amount of time on the internet, particularly in forums. And if you're already part of mobile development forums and maybe online software, you know that there's a decent amount of snobbery in that community. I could basically promise you that jazz is absolutely the same in that sense. So we're going to look at two posts from Reddit here. And I want you guys to try to look over them, just scan, see some of the sentiment around the communities here. And I want you to tell me which one you think is the actual post. So we can see here some very strong feelings about jazz being dead. Let's kind of look at this one as well. If anyone's familiar with the CS career questions subreddit, maybe you're familiar with their sentiment towards things as well. It's kind of in a doomer state nowadays. People are very concerned about the software industry. But once again, people are very critical about things and have very opinionated thoughts of where the industry is going here. Now, we're going to go over a small outline, just talk about some trends in software, why I think we should be concerned, and how we as developers in the community can address that problem. So let's start by just overviewing some notable trends in software engineering disciplines. We're going to go back to Java applications engineering. Now, I'm not going to be able to talk about every trend in software, but I've just picked a handful of them that I think can illustrate my point pretty well here. Java early application engineering, a lot of Swing UI, right? Desktop applications. I personally get a little bit nostalgic when I see the penguin as the desktop shortcut for something. It really just means that someone really had to grind on some probably horribly written UI to make something like this work. Desktop was kind of your strict platform requirement at this point. Some other devices were running Java, but certainly strong on desktop. And similarly, you needed a really strong foundation in both software principles as well as object-oriented design to adapt to this new UX era. I would say that this is parallel to the swing era of jazz. We're talking Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong. Again, the predominant the predominant musical genre at the time here, this Depression era music. Once again, strict platform requirements. You need a big band to play this type of music. Dance halls here, like sure, you could adapt it to different environments, but similar to Java and desktop, the pair is kind of matched pretty strongly. Similarly, artists in this era needed a pretty strong classical foundation to go into this, and definitely needed your technical chops up. It was hard to sort of educate initially into jazz rather than having an instrument background here. I did want to note that this is, yes, swing the music genre, not the GUI toolkit. So let's look at another trend here. This is going to be the home base for this presentation, mobile development. Obviously, a big reason why all of us are here today. Smartphones drove an absolutely new distinction at this time. Mass adoption led to a really strong community as well, both on the product side and on the developer side. Android in particular, I think, exemplifies this. Definitely the open source aspect of it, as well as just a general community that fostered collaboration. I think more so than other technologies, Android really helped to build this up well. Software engineers might have looked like this at the time. A lot of beanies and coffee shops were going on there. And yes, you had FANG mega apps being built and large social media, but also it was kind of a golden era for indie app developers. I was just thinking about some of the apps and how exciting it was to have something like the iBeer app, for example, where you could hold it sideways and pretend to drink it. Does anyone remember that one? Indie games also, golden era at the time. I would say that this is most similar to the modal and cool jazz era. This is really seen as some of the finest jazz that's come out. Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, John Coltrane, my favorite thing, absolute standards within the industry. Similarly, kind of taking over the previous, it's a little bit of a rejection of the bop era sound, but again, replacing swing prominently in the scene. I think that it was also driven by a strong community as well. Kind of Blue, for example, you have Miles Davis, Bill Evans, John Coltrane, three massive figures in the community. I would like to call them the fangs of jazz. I might be the first to ever compare these companies to jazz artists, but I do think that this sense of community really pushed some great product at the time. Once again, considered by many to be a timeless form, this was really the peak popularity of jazz before it started to see a little bit of a descent. What are some other trends that we can kind of use in our example here? Well, crypto and Web3, I think, is a pretty good example. Again, the area of the most prominence, I would say, is probably around the late 2010s to 2020s. Again, very strong community-driven engagement. But you also have mass skepticism seen by many in the industry. How many times did you see software engineers getting upset with the crypto hype, or people who maybe didn't understand anything about it? A lot of finance folks were trying to take advantage of this technology and exploit it at the time. So I think that there was definitely a sense of skepticism there. Additionally, there were some massive market fluctuations at the time, a lot of get-rich-quick schemes that led to huge popularity as well. Now, what is the crypto and Web3 of jazz? Well, I am glad you asked, DroidCon. That would be smooth jazz. Smooth jazz is, it's a controversial jazz genre in the community, to say the least. Definitely represents the commercial popularization of jazz. Think, Kenny G, Grover Washington Jr. This is cocktail jazz, if you could call it something like that. I think similarly, the influence of commercialism really impacted smooth jazz and kind of reminded me in a way of the Web3 version. And once again, you have many classic jazz, think cool jazz era, being pretty critical of this type as well. The final example here is AI and LLMs. I think that this is currently one of the more prominent ones. Advances in hardware has really assisted this in the last few years, and certainly large context-aware and large language models has helped this as well. Again, massive workplace disruptor. Every software discipline has this on their mind in some capacity, especially in mobile as well. Lots of corporate investment in it. And similar to Web3, I think there is a little bit of skepticism in the community. Obviously, the engineers are not too eager to have their jobs replaced by ChatGPT, and I don't think we're going to get there quite yet, but I do agree with the sentiment of maybe some fear in the community around that. I would say that this is actually similar to hip-hop in a lot of ways. Hip-hop kind of from the 90s on. You have a lot of sample-based beats that were happening at this time. This is done with a device called the Akai MPC. Jay Dilla, you can kind of see him right there. Really, this is the ability to use a new hardware to kind of innovate on jazz in a way that hadn't been done before. Once again, the community is still hesitant to accept this as a popular trend, and there's a lot of pushback on this as well. But a lot of artists are forced to modernize their approach, whether that's with sampling older jazz styles and older jazz artists contributing to hip hop, or collaborating with these modern artists as well. Kendrick Lamar uses jazz constantly in his music. This is really something that is kind of like the newest cutting edge in jazz. So I've clearly convinced everyone that jazz and software are really the same thing here. Where can we go from this? Let's talk about the concern and bring it back to mobile for a second. This chart I made from the Stack Overflow developer survey, which they release every year, only from 2011. And actually, it does suck getting those early data points because they don't collate it for you. And I had to open up a scary CSV and run some data analysis on this. But really, you can see the massive uptick in the 2010s when it comes to the percentage of mobile devs year over year. You have less and less programs that are actually educating engineers to join this industry. The example that I like to use is Boston's Intrepid Apprentice program. Actually, in the audience, I think there's some members of the Apprentice program. What this was taking engineers who, at this time period in the bubble, maybe didn't have a software distinction picked, and allowing them to learn how to software engineer for their program. In Boston, basically in any company, if you meet a software engineer around that age, there's a pretty good chance that they worked in Intrepid, and that's kind of where they learned mobile development. I like to call them the Intrepid Mafia, because every single company I work for, you'll have somebody from there. But you can still see this decline is definitely something to be a little bit concerned about. I think another thing we can look at here is the educational focus. Many universities offer distinctions in a lot of different types of software, namely big data, machine learning. I've seen backend, web is popular, but there's not something for mobile. Now, I do want to point out, maybe mobile isn't the best target for something like this, given that it is a very niche technology, but still you can see that it's not an emphasis of an undergraduate program. Stanford, for example, discontinued their mobile development program in 2023. You have to imagine that this is a very large software school, again, pushing a little bit of emphasis away from mobile and making room for other technologies. And you can understand this. As technologies are more new and exciting for younger engineers, and especially for high school students, you want people to pick this and know that they're going into something that's still exciting. So it's not the most surprising thing, but it is still something to consider. Now, does this reflect the job market? Should we be scaling back mobile education in a similar manner? Now, you could look out at the sponsors that we have there, but you could also look on LinkedIn. If you look up Android in the United States, there's 40,000 results. I actually went to the 30th page, and they were still all relevant to Android in some way. I really did not expect that, to be honest, but the market is definitely there online. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, mobile demand also continues to grow. This is sort of a summary of some of the 2023 growth that they're looking at. One important note here is that the BLS actually distinguishes software developers from web. So a lot of this category is going to be having mobile engineers as part of it. But again, smartphone technology isn't going anywhere. You're not all wearing Apple Vision Pros right now. AR hasn't really replaced mobile, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. So I think that there's still a large need for these companies with a large mobile component, or who are looking to make a mobile component, to be able to sort of build from the community. So we need to sort of build that community. Let's look at the inverted population again here, just to really highlight this concern. Many people who came from this apprentice era of mobile have now gotten to the senior and staff level. I personally know from experience in every company I've worked for, there's absolutely more senior and staff Android engineers than entry level. I think that this is because a lot of those engineers started at a time when this was the predominant trend in software engineering. Now we're sort of seeing that cool down a little bit. Is that going to affect hiring? Are we going to have a tougher time getting entry level engineers to go in? This senior-heavy model doesn't really work for sustaining mobile development as a career. You don't want to have senior devs be working on IC roles for their entire time at a company, right? People are going to want to level out or go to higher levels, become managers in some aspects. So let's talk about addressing the concern. We know that there is a little bit of a gap. How can we, as community members, try to foster this community? And how can we learn from what the Jazz community did in this piece? Android, as I've talked about before, is built on community. You all here are no stranger to this. You're at DroidCon in person, probably networking, meeting cool people, learning about nice tech. Slacks, Discords, it's an incredibly strong online developer presence. Consider your own experience as a mobile developer. Have you ever gotten a reply from Jake Wharton on GitHub, or maybe even a react from somebody notable in the Kotlin Lang Slack? These are open communities that you can get respondents from some of the greatest to be part of our distinction here. How did you start developing for mobile? My personal anecdote is that I joined as a machine learning intern in 2018 at a company, and we had no data. There was just no way for us as a startup to build models completely without overfitting any 10 samples that we had. So the very first Android app I built was a data collector for that company. I would not have been able to do it without a very close mentorship presence. Imagine how demotivating it was the first time you had a build.gradle issue or something that you spent an hour on just learning that you can invalidate a cache and it fixes itself with virtually no explanation at all. This is something that having a mentor is going to help a lot with, and I think that for me personally, it made the difference between me staying in machine learning and moving over to mobile dev. Jazz followed actually a very similar model. Open source projects in mobile are generally things that are invited for everyone in the community to contribute to. The way that Jazz is educated is with these jam sessions, as well as, again, strong online presence. Really involved communities are talking about this. Similarly, education from Jazz, it's not just something you can get a degree in and you become a good jazz musician. Jazz education is about practicing with the community. I think the same thing could be said for Android. Yes, you can get your undergraduate degree, you can take a couple classes in Kotlin, learn how to build an app, but you're not really going to be a part of the community unless you maybe pull from an open source project or join one of these conferences, get an idea of what other people are doing, and just collaborate across. Now, how did Cool Jazz stay relevant in this adapting environment? Particularly going back to our example of Cool Jazz lining up with mobile development. Well, I think particularly staying relevant in a dynamic space requires a lot of adapting and adopting to these new technologies. For example, if you consider AI to be the most predominant one, how can we use that with mobile development? Maybe that's a increase in on-device edge computing, and people who are maybe interested in AI can learn specifically how they can cater edge and local device models onto a mobile device. Maybe you're using it with ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot from within your IDE. This is another way that you could bring AI into the mobile development world. Modal Jazz did something very similar to this, and there's a lot of examples of that being brought to kind of a more common phase. The song Favorite Things that I brought up earlier with John Coltrane, Outkast actually sampled that and made it, once again, very popular at the time. Enthusiasts are fostering a community of newer artists. In my example, I had a mentor that was really influential for me at a company, and that personal relationship kind of led me to now being presenting at these sorts of conferences, being involved in the community. Cool Jazz artists were definitely doing the same thing at the time, and I think that them fostering the newer generation led to that timelessness of the genre. An example of this is Miles Davis, obviously, trained Herbie Hancock, and even though Herbie Hancock went to that jazz fusion kind of funk sound, still, he's definitely a big influence, and Cool Jazz maintained its relevancy throughout that. Now, what can you do across the levels that maybe you have access to? If you're in a startup, consider hiring interns that have maybe just a general amount of software experience and educate them into the world of mobile development. Maybe you're at a mid-sized company. Some things that I've seen work really well are actually building documentation around how to contribute to a mobile app and encouraging cross-engineering in a hackathon. Potentially, you can start a mobile apprenticeship program within your company, hiring someone from maybe a different profession, training them up to mobile, and then having kind of a interview process towards the end of that. If you're a large company, maybe you can ensure that the pipeline allows for younger engineers. You could sponsor a local mobile event in the area. GDG Cloud Boston, this is like our Beanpot Android logo that we have here. The GDG community is another great way for you to not only provide mentorship, but to, again, just inspire people to join the family and be a part of our community. The last thing to note is that if you're going to help mentor someone, just know that everyone has to start somewhere. We all have our introduction into mobile, and everyone probably has their unique story of what brought them in. Just think back to the first time you built a recycler view. Everyone has to forget a layout manager at some point. You can be the person who tells them they forgot to add that layout manager. You can foster the new generation of mobile development. Thank you all so much for joining. I hope you took something away from this or feeling inspired to contribute to the community. These are some links of mine if you want to get in touch and chat. Also, we do have a Dev Fest, so maybe if you're feeling eager to speak at a conference or maybe even just join some engineers, consider applying to speak at Dev Fest Boston. The session closes at the end of this month. But yeah, would love to consider you or answer any questions you folks have after. Thank you.